Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, no matter what time of day it is. I am really glad that you've taken a couple of minutes out to stop and view this message. My name is Reverend Paul J. Bern. I'm the pastor of the online church known as the Social Gospel Worship and Learning Center. I'm located in Atlanta, Georgia. For this week's um, for this week's message, I'm going to delve into the problems with our media and how it affects people, the things that are wrong are a social injustice, and and what can be done to fix it. So I'm going to call this 23 Uncomfortable Facts the mainstream media still won't discuss, going all the way back to the first of this year and before that. For my subtitle, it's simply going to be You Shall Not Bear False Witness Against Your Neighbor. I've got the book, chapter, and verse on that I'm going to share with you in just another minute or two, so hold on, please. The ninth commandment, as it is written in the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 16, is very explicit. You shall not lie, or thou shalt not if you prefer. Yet for its entire existence, humankind has developed a remarkable propensity for ever more sophisticated forms of deception. For example, during the Hitler dictatorship in Germany, from the early 1930s up to the mid 1940s, there was a branch of the government called the Ministry of Propaganda. This propaganda ministry dished out a torrent of profane distortions about Jewish people and later about the outcome of the war itself. It was headed by a guy named Joseph Goebbels, who ultimately committed suicide at the end of the war rather than face capture, which for him surely would have been followed by a death sentence at the Nuremberg trials in 1946. The theme of this week's message: today in America, we have a similar position within the White House staff that we call the press secretary, who can be seen regularly on the evening news. He or she serves the same function. They just have a far more innocuous title than propaganda minister. This person's job, and I've noticed regular personnel changes, is to spoon feed the media the information du jour of the day. Well, everybody knows that the media is told what to say and how to say it, and yet there were remarkably few protests about it up until about 2011 or so. This was during the mushrooming of the Arab Spring, which led to the Occupy Wall Street and We Are the 99% movements, which more recently have morphed into the Black Lives Matter movement, all of which are still very much active today. So, this week's message of mine is my small contribution towards demanding some genuine truth and authenticity from our news sources. No more U.S. government propaganda, please. We're all fed up with the government. Not so much America, mind you, just its government. This calls for, therefore, a vote of no confidence in the press by we the people. For decades, the mainstream media in the United States was accustomed to being able to tell the American people what to think and how to think it. Unfortunately for them, a whole lot of Americans, are starting to break free from that paradigm. People today much prefer to think for themselves. Um, Blind obedience is not only stupid, it can be pretty hazardous as well. This includes a significant number of people of faith like myself. A Gallup survey from back in 2012, 10 years ago, found that 60% of all Americans have little or no trust in the mainstream media. Here, 10 years later, that number has now exceeded 85% of America's electorate as I write this. More people than ever are increasingly seeking out alternative sources of information. In the United States today, for instance, just 6 giant media corporations control the mainstream media. Those giant media corporations own television networks, cable channels, movie studios, radio stations, newspapers, magazines, publishing houses, music labels, and many other very prominent websites. As a result of this, as of lately, the alternative media has now taken center stage. Thanks to the internet, the mainstream media no longer has a complete monopoly on the news. In recent years, the alternative media, such as Alternet, Democracy Now!, Bill Moyers, WeAreChange.org, and Chris Hedges, just to name 5 of the better known ones. These people have exploded in popularity. People want to hear about the things that the mainstream media doesn't really want to talk about. They want to hear news that is not filtered by corporate bosses and government censors. They want the whole darn truth. And they know that they are not getting it from the mainstream media. That's also one of the primary reasons why people are doing away with cable TV, as I have. It's not just the money saved from unsubscribing. It's the fact that everybody knows that everything they're watching is a load of BS. And so, it has come to an end game because of that for the established media conglomerates. We are watching, pardon me, we are watching a media revolution happen, and many influential people in the traditional media are totally freaking out about it. In fact, some of the traditional, or as I call them, lame stream media, have even begun publishing articles that mock the American people for not trusting the mainstream media. Americans that don't trust the media are depicted as allegedly being paranoid conspiracy theorists that have left rationality behind. And that's just not the way it is. You see, at the end of the day, It is sometimes okay to question authority. Ever have the feeling you're being lied to by the news media, the authorities, the corporate world? Look around. Trust is hitting historic lows. Less than one-fifth of Americans have a favorable view of the federal government, a decline of about 50% since 2002, 20 years ago. That's according to the Pew Center for People and the Press. Negative opinions about the performance of news organizations now equal or surpass all-time highs on 9 of the 12 core measures that the Pew Research Center has been tracking since 1985. A Pew report said back in the summer of 2014. Since then, it's virtually 12 out of 12 core measures. And so the article goes on to sound like it's very irrational not to trust the media. But yet, in this day and age, it is imperative that we all learn to think for ourselves. It's perfectly okay to be skeptical. There are no laws against that. None whatsoever. So, here I am talking to you about all this, and I am presenting to you, or representing, a broken system. What system? Hold on, and I'm going to tell you, as of right now, because anyone that does not acknowledge that the mainstream media has an agenda is either really naive or they're not being honest with themselves. Don't you get mad at me. I'd rather speak the truth here, okay? The mainstream media presents a view of the world that is very favorable to their big corporate owners and the big corporations that spend billions of dollars to advertise on their networks. The mainstream media is the mouthpiece of the establishment. And the worldview being pushed on the big networks is going to be consistent with the economic, financial, political, and social goals of that same establishment. The mainstream media loves to talk about things that fit in with that agenda, and they don't like to talk about things that suggest that there could be something wrong with that agenda. And so, my rebuttal to all this, and I'm going to close out the rest of this message with this, are the following 23 facts that the mainstream media doesn't really want to talk about, because they are all red flags that tell us that theirs is an agenda for a system that is broken beyond repair. Number one, the mainstream media really wants to avoid talking about the fact that gun sales are absolutely skyrocketing in the aftermath of all the mass shootings everywhere. Americans from all backgrounds are arming themselves to the teeth. They also don't really want to talk about the fact that disarming the population has resulted in some of the most horrific massacres in human history. Let me give you a few examples. First off, from the oldest up until the present time, starting in 1911, this is what would happen if they enacted total 100% gun control. Stuff like I'm about to read off to you here. It's not that I don't think there should be gun control. I think it should be done, however, in an intelligent manner. Now, back to the topic. In 1911, Turkey disarmed its citizens, and between 1915 and 1917, they murdered 1.5 million Armenians. 1.5 million is a whole lot of dead people. In 1929, Russia disarmed its citizens, and between 1929 and 1953, they murdered 20 million Russians. Makes Armenia look like a daycare center, doesn't it? In 1935, China disarmed its citizens, and between 1948 and 1952, they murdered 20 million Chinese. 1938, Germany disarmed its citizens, passing strict gun control measures. And between 1939 and 1945, they murdered 6 million Jews and slaughtered 34 million others. Others meaning just about everybody you could think of, from the oldest to the very youngest. It was bad. 1956, Cambodia disarmed its citizens. And between 1975 and 1977, they murdered 1 million educated people. They only killed the smartest ones. Makes me wonder. Next example, 1964. Guatemala disarmed its citizens, and between 1964 and 1981, they murdered 100,000 Mayan Indians. 1970, almost done. Uganda disarmed its citizens, and between 1971 and 1979, they murdered 300,000 Christians. Last but not least, if the Second Amendment were to get repealed, these same massacres of civilians will happen next right here in the United States. That was point number 2 out of the 23 points. So let me keep going here. Number 3, the news media really doesn't want to talk about the fact that a bill allowing for the indefinite military detention of U.S. citizens on American soil was quietly passed by the U.S. Senate more than 10 years ago. Never mind that it's completely unconstitutional. See the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution, namely the 4th, 5th, and 8th Amendments. Number 4, they really don't want to talk about the fact that volcanoes all along the Pacific Ocean's ring of fire are roaring to life. It seems like a new eruption is being reported every few days now, and earthquakes globally are at an all-time high. Number 6, they don't really want to talk about the fact that the use of genetically engineered seeds has caused an explosion of new superweeds that are incredibly difficult for farmers to kill. Number 6, they don't really want to talk about the fact that trends forecasters globally are predicting a major financial disaster within the next few years. Number 7, they don't really want to talk about the fact that in America today it is easier to get into Harvard than it is to get a job as a flight attendant. Number 9, they don't really want to talk about the fact that over 1,000 Transportation Security Administration, TSA employees, have been fired for stealing from travelers since 2003. Our tax dollars hard at work. Nice. Number 9, they don't really want to talk about the fact that giant corporations such as Facebook, GE, Halliburton, and Citibank, among numerous others, are funneling gigantic amounts of money through offshore banking havens, such as the Cayman Islands, for example, in an effort to avoid taxes. Number 10, they don't really want to talk about the fact that the US dollar is in danger of losing its status as the primary reserve currency of the world. If this were to occur, which is gradually becoming increasingly likely, financial calamity would surely follow. Such a calamity would make the 2000 crash and the Great Depression seem like child's play in comparison. Number 11, they don't want to talk about the fact that 1/4 of all homeless people in America are children under the age of 12. This is one social injustice alone that makes me ashamed to be an American. Moreover, like the rest of the country, I too am one check away from becoming homeless myself. For such a thing as this to be happening in what is allegedly the world's richest country in the world is absolutely inexcusable. Number 12, they don't really want to talk about the fact that the U.S. economy is losing millions of jobs to nations where it is legal to pay workers slave labor wages. Actually, this process has already started in the U.S. as well, due to the fact that no one can live on the current minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. Not unless you're sleeping in a tent or in your car. Number 13, they don't really want to talk about the fact that large number of formerly patriotic Americans are leaving the country in droves because they are completely disgusted with what America has become. And that is the world's largest arms merchant, the largest merchant of pornographic movies, and the biggest bully on the whole planet. Number 14, they don't really want to talk about the fact that hunger and poverty are absolutely exploding in the United States at the same time that they are telling us that the U.S. economy has recovered from the Great Recession. Can't have it both ways. Number 15, they don't really want to talk about the fact that North Korea now has an unknown number, that is, anywhere from 4 or 5 up to 20 or more, 3-stage rockets with enough range to hit parts of the western United States. The North Koreans have also got enough striking capability to wipe out American military bases on Guam Island and at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Number 16, they don't really want to talk about the fact that the United States Postal Service is losing $25 million a day and is on the verge of financial collapse. Number 17, they don't really want to talk about the fact that our biggest oil supplier in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, still kills people for changing religions. Or sometimes just because the crown prince doesn't like you. Item number 18. They don't really want to talk about the fact that political correctness has taken over America. The truth is that the media does not see any problem with that at all. Number 19. They don't really want to talk about the fact that nearly 500,000 employees of the federal government are making more than $100,000 a year, while 25% of American children go to bed hungry each night. Talk about a social injustice, my God. 4 more to go, and I'm done. Stick with me. This gets better. They don't really want to talk about the fact that the birth rate in the United States has fallen to an all-time low. The financial elites, the super rich, are actually absolutely thrilled that less babies are being born. Number 21, they don't really want to talk about the fact that Barack Obama received more than 99% of the vote in more than 100 precincts in Ohio on Election Day back in 2012. Number 22, they don't really want to talk about the fact that many U.S. cities are seeing violent crime totally spiral out of control, while police officers are quitting their jobs in droves because of poor pay. Last but not least, item number 23 on my little list for this week. They don't really want to talk about the fact that the U.S. Federal Reserve created the conditions for the last financial crisis, along with their mismanagement of the economy that has now brought us to the verge of another horrible economic downturn. Maybe the Federal Reserve should be nationalized so that printing and coining money returns to the auspices of the United States Treasury like our Constitution specifies. See Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. It's all spelled out right there. And so, in closing, all that Congress and the President needs to do is to return to the original Constitution. It's the perfect way to wipe out all of the so-called national debt, which really only exists on paper anyway. But it can't be done because Congress's corporate sponsors won't allow it. That's why the system is broken, and it's up to us, we the people, to get the job done. Because, you see, if our government hasn't the strength, the backbone, and the political willpower to do this on behalf of the entire country, then we the people will have to do this by ourselves. That's all for this week's message. I know I went on a little longer than usual there, but these are important things that need to be brought to the forefront. They need to be talked about amongst the people. We need solutions. We're going to have to formulate them ourselves. We can't count on the government for much of anything except starting more wars. And so, that's all for now. Thanks ever so much for stopping by. And be blessed in Jesus' mighty name.